because of the very type of insights that we just heard from her. I'm grateful for her service, her intellect, her insights. And especially her pugnacious nature that did not cause her to back down, that caused her to stand up after being a victim herself. I was approached by a lady at a store in Longview, Texas, adjoining county to where I was a district judge, and she asked if I remembered her, and I didn't. Well, she never testified in court, but she said she was there in the courtroom when I sentenced her husband, that she and her daughter had been abused year after year, and her husband had been arrested different times, but he was such a smooth salesman that he always convinced judges to give him a slap on the wrist and probation and be on his way, and that I was the first judge in all those years to be able to see through her husband's great salesmanship and send him to prison. And there's a lot of things that aren't pleasant about being a judge or a justice, been that too, but to have somebody say, you gave my daughter and me our lives, and we're doing great, and she's doing great, and she's going to go to a great college now. Anyway, but you got to be able to see through gaslighting. You got to be able to see through lies and get to the facts. Now, we're being told about what a terrible shortage of baby formula there is in this country. And there is. You go in the stores, the shelves have a tremendous shortage. We hear different excuses, but if you had a businessman like President Trump in the White House, when he sees a shortage of something that was needed, he would find out where the problem is. He would call the people that could do something about it. Hey, we got to do something about this. And they would figure out a way to get something done about it. Find out where the holdup were, where the problem was. But instead, when there seems to be a shortage or a problem, well, any Republicans say, hey, why aren't we doing something about the baby formula? This gaslighting technique gets used. And then we find out not only is there a shortage in the store, but you just shipped truckloads of baby formula to the border, which acts as a draw to more illegal immigration, especially women with babies or parents with babies, to come across and get the baby formula that is not being allowed to go to Americans and American citizens or people that are legally here. And the thought comes of the flights. Every week we're in session, flight up here, flight back. We sit through the same presentation over and over again by the flight attendant. Sometimes they do it live. Sometimes they're just going through the motions and there's a tape playing. But they make very clear if we have a problem like the fuselage depressurizing, the oxygen mask will drop down, and adults are to put the mask on themselves before they put it on the child. And the reason is rather simple. Because if you put if you're trying to put your child's mask on and you don't have oxygen, there's a good chance you'll pass out, and then both you and your child will die. You get that on yourself, and then you will have the oxygen you need to think clearly, to make sure your child or children or those dependent upon you can get what they need. When someone is determined not to provide help to Americans that you're sending all over the world, or you're sending as a lure to people to come in illegally, which we heard during our committee hearing, yes, we do want to make these people into voters that are flooding in illegally. That was quite a revelation, although we'd suspected that for some time. But there are consequences to not taking care of the greatest, most philanthropic country in the history of the world that has done more for other people, other nations. Yes, we've had our own problems, but no one has fought racism like was fought here. The most loss of life ever in any war was in the Civil War. Over 500,000 people died over this issue of slavery. There's no country that has ever fought to end slavery, to end racism the way this country has. I thought we had made tremendous progress. And that was one of the things about the United States Army. You know, I was at the home of the infantry, and you just wanted to make sure that the person next to you was going to be helpful. You weren't concerned about their race or anything like that. You just wanted to make sure that you were going to work together. And it was quite a good microcosm, even though the 4 years I was in, it was not a pleasant time to be in the military. We were sometimes ordered not to wear a uniform off post because there were people that hated us for wearing a uniform. That was post-Vietnam. But with regard to the baby formula, if you keep drawing people into this country, now we're told we need to pay people to have abortions. You keep taking those actions, you will destroy this nation. And once this most philanthropic country in the history of the world is destroyed or converted into some dictatorial Orwellian society, all these countries that we've been able to help since particularly 1789, when the Constitution was ratified, that help is not going to be there. And having heard from people, countries, especially legislatures and parliamentarians in other countries that we consider to be free, they privately will say and have, you have got to protect America's freedom. We see you losing it. And when you lose your freedom in America, there will be no place else to go to have freedom. You're the one that has secured it for the places that have it. This is so important. So when our judiciary and when our executive Department of Justice abuses people and abuses the system and uses lies instead of truth and uses technology to spy on its citizens, we're in big trouble. And I know when I first got here in January of 2005, we Republicans were in the majority, but when it came to civil rights, we had a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle that felt the same way. And there were some on our side who wanted to protect all the power we could give to the Department of Justice. But again, there were people on both sides of the aisle that said this is a threat to our democratic republic. We can't give them this much power. But over the years, after Democrats took the majority in January of 2007 through January of 2011, and then got it back, we're not getting the kind of help we did those first 2 years with dealing with the abuses within our own Ministry of Truth. Because the DOJ really, using Orwellian terms from 1984, and as I've said before, what we're seeing is the only thing Orwell got wrong was the year. It wasn't 1984, it's now. And it's not called the Ministry of Truth or the Ministry of Love. The Ministry of Love, of course, in 1984, people remember, that was the entity that took people into custody, knocked down doors. They used techniques like our current DOJ does to intimidate people, to use much more power than they ever need just to intimidate, like 1984, like a totalitarian government. And I bring that up because I remember in the 1980s, and I had so much respect for the FBI agents I knew, and I'd seen numerous times. I didn't do a lot of criminal work during the 10 years that I was a civil trial lawyer, but they would contact a defendant, soon to be a defendant, say, we got an indictment, we got a warrant. You can either report to the jail at 10 a.m. tomorrow, or we'll come get you, and you'd much rather come in on your own. If they had a lawyer, they would call the lawyer, have your client come in at 9 or 10 a.m. Not now. Oh, no. Oh, no. We want the Justice Department, they want to come in and knock down your door because it's a lot more fun. They have the battering ram, and it's a lot more fun to get people in their underwear or maybe in their pajamas that are in bed because you get to scare them and it's easier to intimidate them. What happened to those days when it didn't matter whether the assistant U.S. attorney or the FBI agents voted Democrat or Republican? They were going to make sure they didn't abuse their power. I'm not seeing that kind of concern like I used to see from people in the Department of Justice. I know there's some that feel that way, but yet they're being gaslit if they try to report or be whistleblowers, and their careers are destroyed, kind of like Director Mueller destroyed the career of the FBI agent that was a whistleblower and reported the unethical and, I would say, illegal conduct by the FBI in trying to persecute during the prosecution of Ted Stevens when they abused the system and convicted an innocent man. That's the Mueller way. You promote the one that engaged in the fraud, and you reward or you punish the one who reported the fraud within the FBI. And we've just seen it grow worse and worse as Mueller's very dear friend James Comey took over. The abuses grew. And then Christopher Wray was appointed to clean up the FBI. And it appears to me his way of cleaning things up is just sweep it under the rug. And if somebody lies to the FISA court, commits a crime, whereas if it were a conservative, they would put them under the prison rather than punish. We'll just let him go get a more high-paying job somewhere else. That's not punishment. It's not deterrent. And it is doing massive damage to this country. So we have the Ministry of Truth now, called the Disinformation Board, that's been created. And this is being led and created by people who have been champions of disinformation, champions of gaslighting, who want to convince America, if you think there's a problem, if you think there's abuse in the FISA court, if you think there was any improprieties in elections, then we need to come after you and charge you with disinformation. And just like for those of us who have not read 1984 or don't remember, the Ministry of Truth, in this case now called the Disinformation Board, they were charged with rewriting history every day. And as Orwell pointed out through, I believe his name was Winston, on one day they might say, well, this government did not invent the airplane, but all of the good changes that have made it more effective, more efficient, faster, those came by our great big brother government. And then eventually you would get to the point where you would just forget all of that and say, big brother government created the airplane, has had everything to do with making it effective, and just take credit for everything good and then blame everybody else for anything bad. So that seems like where we're going. We could call it the Gaslighting Board, but it's called the Disinformation Board, and it's headed by a person who herself has been quite guilty of disinformation, and yet she's going to be in charge of coming up with disinformation for the future, apparently, and we can expect problems ahead for sure. And now, this article from May 12th, yesterday, from the New York Post, Nina Jankowicz says verified Twitter users should edit others' tweets. I mean, we're right out of 1984, going back to the days of the 50s when some songwriter wrote, if your mommy is a commie, well, you got to turn her in. This is where it appears the Disinformation Board wants to go. Yeah, kids, turn in your parents. If you find out that they've said anything privately at home that is inconsistent with the new truth that the Disinformation Board has come up with, this is dangerous stuff. It cannot be overstated. We have got to stop the Disinformation Board. The solution to misinformation is more freedom so that people that have accurate information can come out with it. But when the government puts its finger on the scales of justice, on the balance, then you can be assured you're going to get less truth and less justice, because it's not going to be fair. You know, I mentioned before I was an exchange student for a summer to the old Soviet Union, and from what I understood, it was the Soviet government, it was the Communist Party. They put out all this misinformation, and they would lie about things. They would cover up. Still wonder how many cosmonauts may have died during their space program, but they never came out truthfully with what all happened. But I was with a couple of Soviet college students who I liked a great deal. They were wonderful people. And we were looking at an exhibit about some of the space program things. And you know, Gagarin was the first human ever in space. And there were some entries about Gagarin and the world hero that he was. And up to that point, I felt like, well, these are college students who would be the most likely to get upset if they were lied to. And it said something about Gagarin being killed testing a new experimental plane. And the Soviet college friend, Male, said, yeah, right, well, he spoke terrific English. He said, yeah, well, we know that's not true. And I was intrigued. You know, I'd not heard them indicate that they knew they were being lied to by the Soviet government. And the other Soviet college student said, yeah, there's no way that happened. And I said, you don't believe he was killed testing a plane as a test pilot? And they both chimed in, no, there's no way. He was the greatest hero in the history of the world, the first man in space. There is no way the Soviet government would allow him to get into a plane by himself that wasn't safe. That didn't happen. It was too important. He was too important as a hero, as someone that made us admire our government. They wouldn't let him die like that. Well, I didn't know whether he died as a test pilot or not, but I was intrigued that they believed to their core that the Soviet government lied to them. Why? Because the Soviet government constantly lied to them. They would make up lies. In fact, I remember this was 1973. Found it interesting in Pravda. They were reporting some things about Watergate emerging back in the U.S., and because it really was like a disinformation board or Ministry of Truth, whichever one you want to call it, they made everything about the Soviet Union. Everything was centered on the Soviet Union. So their take on Watergate was that because Richard Nixon came to the Soviet Union, the first president ever to do so, that's why the Democrats came after him and were wanting to throw him out of office or put him in jail because he made friends with the Soviets. Well, that was their take in order to make it all about the Soviet Union. And, of course, we know crimes were committed and the cover-up was the worst of it. But this is where we're headed. And it's a very dangerous time. We do not need a disinformation board. We need people being able to stand up and speak up without intimidation because they're conservative black or because they are abused or whatever. They need to be able to speak up and to bring evidence forward or at least have an investigation to get to the bottom of things without being belittled, without being gaslit, and that will do more to secure our freedom for the future. And with that, I yield back.